Welcome to this episode of The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron. I'm delighted to host this episode and this podcast. I hope you've been listening to and meeting visually the guests that I've had on this season. I think we've had some remarkable thinkers, people living good lives, interesting lives, imperfect lives, just like yours and mine. I was thinking a lot about a particular story that I remembered reading about years ago. And it's a story of a woman by the name of Olga Bloom, not somebody that I met, but maybe you can leave a comment if you know who she is or more of the story than I do, or in fact, if you've met her. She was a fixture in the musical life of New York City. And aside from being an accomplished instrumentalist, violinist, what made her story remarkable to me was that in the mid-1970s, she sold her Long Island home. Don't know what market values were then, but it was probably a lot of money. And she bought a disused coffee barge. So just imagine the look of it and the smell. And she took this and had it repaired. And I think Rockaway, somewhere like that. She took it to a place where they repaired it, refinished it. And then she had it towed to the Brooklyn Bridge where it sat and remains. And it has a title now. It's called Barge Music. Maybe that ties the two stories or parts of the story together for you, the violinist and the barge owner. And what she did was she created, I think, the world's only floating barge. Now, if you've been to the Lower East Side of New York City, the Brooklyn Bridge, I've been there fairly recently. You know that environment. You know what it would be like to come to a concert on the water, literally in a barge floating on the water, and what you would see from the windows of the barge and the environment. It's a really beautiful idea that she pulled together nature and another part of nature, which is music. It's not unnatural. It's absolutely an inherent expression of nature, human nature, and the rest of nature. What Olga Bloom did was fascinating. It's still a concert hall. Musicians, whether they're conservatory musicians or world-famous musicians that might be playing at Carnegie Hall one night, now come to her and play chamber music and jazz and different styles. And what interests me about this story, aside from the fact that I'm fascinated by it, the music, concert hall, the uniqueness of it, is something that Olga Bloom said when the mayor visited the barge and asked her the question. He said, when are you going to, he said, basically, when are you going to shore up the piano or put it on pilings so that it doesn't move around as the current moves around it? And she said this, she said, I will never put the barge nor the instruments on pilings because all beauty, all art, is in some ways a wrestling with impermanence and even death. So the mayor says, why don't you stabilize that sliding piano? And she says, no, that's by design. All of life, all of art, and all of music is in some way a wrestling, a human wrestling with impermanence. In other words, with fragility, with instability, with unpredictability, and even with death. And I don't think she was being morbid. I think she was being insightful and profound in her thought, and maybe sharing an insight that would give the mayor in that moment and you and I in this moment an insight into what she was trying to not create, but reveal in nature itself. By not stabilizing instruments, she said, you're going to have a different experience of this expression of nature that is music. One of the things I think we struggle with the most, and maybe it's because of good, sweet, heartfelt, loving lies, untruths that we're told as children, is that we should rest ourselves on the notion of permanence and stability. I think in childhood, we might have the sense that things are stable and permanent, and then suddenly something rocks our little worlds and we realize something about the big world and life itself, that is inherently unstable, inherently and constantly changing. You might know a story about another famous violinist, more famous even than Olga Bloom by a lot, and that's Itzhak Perlman. Now, I don't know, based on the research that I've done, if this is apocryphal, a myth, or a factual story, but let's hear it nonetheless and consider it. Another great violinist that came to mind, Itzhak Perlman, one of the greatest, maybe today's greatest violinists, gave a concert at Avery Fisher Hall, with the New York Philharmonic. And the story goes that he came out, and I've seen him in concert a number of times, with his crutches because, of course, he was a victim of polio as a child. And he walks onto the stage, and he sits down, and then he undoes the clasps on one of his braces on his legs, and he moves his leg to where he wants to position it, and he sits, holds the instrument under his chin, and then plays. And in this particular concert, it said that as he was in the first or early bars of a concerto with the orchestra of the Philharmonic, one of his strings, I don't know which one it was, broke. Now, there's a moment of great stress, you can imagine, for the violinist, even for the orchestra, apparently everybody could hear it in the hall. You can imagine the sound of this breaking metal string. And what happened was, according to the story, Perlman stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, and then made a decision that all of us can make in those moments, even though they are unique and remarkable and worthy of retelling. And he started again and started to play the same concerto, modulating, changing strings and fingering in order to play it on 3 strings rather than 4. Well, I don't know again if Itzhak Perlman would tell you that this happened or not. I'll wait till he leaves a comment below. But what matters to me, nonetheless, isn't the heroism of him, but the capacity of a human being. That every one of us has those moments in our lives when we are stopped in our tracks. We can't create the music that we intended. It has changed. We have been changed. But we do have the capacity to stop, to reframe, to regroup, to reevaluate circumstances, thoughts, feelings, ourselves, our capacities, our strengths, and then either to walk off the stage and say, I'm done, I have failed, or I have been failed by this physical impediment to my success, the violin in my hand, or we can make maybe a more beautiful, maybe even more heroic and not copyable, but admirable decision, which is to continue playing. So Olga Bloom decides that the violin should be in the hands of an instrumentalist whose seat might be moving from side to side. Olga Bloom decides that the cello can slide and slip a little under the fingers of the pianist, that the cellist who has his post rooted to the ground so that he can anchor himself on the floor knows that it might sway and sway. And Itzhak Perlman apparently had a moment when nothing worked, when at least one of his 4 great capacities to make beauty in music and to pursue and continue his reputation in the pursuit of gorgeous music in this world, adding beauty to the world, was stymied, was challenged. We have that all the time. I certainly think about this country that I am in, but I think about all countries I've lived in, a number of them. And there are moments when we feel like everything is broken or something fundamental has broken. We're dealing with the reality of change, whether we have chosen it or it has chosen us. And we have a decision that we get to make, which is, do I carry on with this change and still make something gorgeous of my music, of my life, of my expression, of my connections to the people in the world around me, of my generosity to the people in the world around me, of the wisdom that I get to pour into the world around me that might be actually bettered, amplified, increased because of the breakage of one string in society, whatever that is? Do we deal with the job loss? It's something that irrevocably changes us for the worse, or possibly when we've had time to grieve and mourn the loss of what we had and even what we felt we were, do we have the ability then, and seize it, to say, and now I get to grow on the basis not only of the job, but of the job loss as well? Do we deal with death in our lives as something that allows us to crumble and make us a person who can never come together again? Or do we reconsolidate ourselves on the basis of what we now know about the impermanence of life and maybe the permanence of love, even though the nature of it has changed? Maybe one of the answers that I come to and that you might come to is that we shouldn't grip so hard, that we should hold life and experiences and relationships in gentle, caring hands, realizing that everything is fragile. Everything can break. Everything can change. Inherently, everything will change, including us. There's only one thing that we know, which is that we're alive, and I believe that means that if we're alive, it's with purpose. That's my spiritual bent. That's my inclination and my understanding of why I'm still on this earth, because I have something and things to do that are positive, that are edifying and beautifying in this world. I still have more to play on an instrument that, because of age and circumstance, isn't what it was. It can't run as fast. It can't lift as much. It can't do some of the things it was able to do. But now what can I do that I need to embrace? We're looking at a world that is changed by populism, by shifts from left to right and rarely to center. We're looking at wars. We're looking at all the conflicts in society and in the global society. And either we can say, I'm out. I can't handle this. My string is broken. It's not my fault. Or we can say, I too can live in this world of fragility because nothing changed. It's always been this way. It's always been changing. It's always been fragile. And yet generation after generation after generation of human beings have come into this world, been fulfilled in this world, been beautiful and added beauty to this world. And so must I in this age, in this day of my life. So with Olga Bloom and the apocryphal story of Itzhak Perlman, and you, because you're the storyteller of your own story, your own life, and you're learning from the people in your life, whether they are people you read about and hear about or people that you encounter every day. I hope that this adds to your sense of what today and tomorrow might bring. For the Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron, I am Rabbi Ron Lipaz. Hope this is helpful. I would love if you could do a favor for me as we're coming toward the end of the first season. One is to give reviews, hopefully positive ones, because they help us grow, to leave comments, to let me know your thoughts on these stories, and maybe to share some of your own insights so that not only I, but other listeners and viewers of this podcast can benefit from your wisdom. Thank you very much. Our producer and editor is Jonah Lipaz. Our musical theme is composed by Amotz Plessner, and our logo, graphic design by Janice Rudnonsky. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.